Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Vince Staley, Executive Director of Media Impact Funders, and I want to welcome you all to this really interesting conversation we're going to have today with several great experts on parenting and childhood, and it's really a treat to be able to highlight the books of our authors today, Joy Thomas Moore and Max King. Just a note on logistics as we get underway. We really want this to be a conversation. And so for all of you participating in this webinar, if you want to ask a question, and we really encourage that, questions, comments, commentary, you can use the Q&A function. I believe you'll find that if you scroll up to the upper left of your screen, offer a question. We'll keep track of that, and we'll moderate questions and discussions throughout. But with that, I'd like to get underway with a few brief comments. This year, some of us were very fortunate to be at Sundance, where we saw the premiere of a really remarkable film, moving film, Won't You Be My Neighbor? It was a real hit on the documentary circuit about the life and work of Fred Rogers, of course, and this being the sort of 50th anniversary of the beginning of his Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. There was a tremendous amount of interest in his work, and that I think comes at a time of great need for his message, a time of bullying and increasing political violence in political rhetoric, and even recently, when there was the terrible shooting at the synagogue in Squirrel Hill, which was actually Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. A lot of people turned to him for sort of the kind of advice and counsel that we seek when in those dark times. And so we're also very fortunate for anyone who wants to go deeper into the life and work of Fred Rogers to have the authoritative and authorized biography written by Maxwell King on Fred Rogers. It's really long years in the development. It's a very deep dive with great access to the materials, and it's great to have Max with us again for this webinar. Some of you may recognize Max because he was with us just last month for a really interesting conversation about the First Amendment. And we'll post the link to that as well and share it for anybody who wants to hear that side. But one of the things we've learned from Max is, you know, the message from Fred Rogers is not just his relationship to children and understanding that, but also the impact on parenting, the impact that Fred had on parenting. So we're going to be talking about that. And to go even deeper on that issue, we have Joy Thomas Moore, who's a longtime friend of Media Impact Funders, served on the board for many years, and she has written this lovely book, The Power of Presence, Be a Voice in Your Child's Ear Even When You're Not With Them. I have a different title for it, which is Kids User Manual. So that's another way of thinking it. If you have kids, or if you have grandkids, or if ever you were a child, this is really useful information. And since I'm not the expert in this category, but we do have great expertise on the staff, and in particular, our communications director, Nina Sachdev, is the mother of 2 children under the age of 5. So obviously, she has the expertise for this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Nina to take it from here. Thanks, Nina.
Thank you, Vince. I don't feel like an expert. I'm just a mom, but I'm very pleased to introduce a mom expert in Joy Thomas Moore, who has worked with the Annie E. Casey Foundation for many years before starting her own consulting firm. And Joy has endured and overcome many obstacles throughout her single parenting journey and has beautifully packaged the lessons she has learned in The Power of Presence. In the book, Joy explores 7 pillars of presence: mind, heart, faith, courage, resources, connectedness, and values that all parents can use to positively influence their children. The book takes a practical approach to finding ways to be the best parent you can be in spite of the exhaustion and challenges that come with parenting, single or not. In addition to sharing her own stories of struggle and resilience, Joy also highlights stories from women who have also been there, and we'll get to hear more about one of those stories in a few minutes. The Power of Presence was also, I just learned, recently included in Ebony Magazine's Power 100 list edition as a favorite read. So I'm sure it's on a lot of young parents' reading wish lists this holiday season. Joy, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for writing this wonderful manual. I read your book through the lens of a single parent. So to me, the book was both instructive in that it provides real, actionable, practical advice, but also offered a hefty dose of healing and connectedness, which is important for all parents, single or not, because we need to know we're not alone. You write in the beginning of the book that presence is the secret sauce of parenting. Can you talk about these 7 pillars and how they emerged for you and how they can all serve as guideposts for parents during times of struggle?
Absolutely. And thank you, Nina and Vince and Media Impact Funders, obviously. And actually, you are an expert. Every day that you parent your kids, you become an expert. so I thank you. Yeah, these pillars emerged for me in a way that I guess as I was going through the process of parenting, being a single parent, actually 3 times, you know, twice by choice and once by tragedy. And each time I learned a little bit more. So I, like you, said, I'm not an expert in this, but along the way, I did get some expertise that, that I was hoping that I packaged and was hoping, to share through this book. And so these 7 pillars became my sort of guiding light. The mind, whether those are the things, the mind will unclutter you and allow you to see and deal with your children in a way that if you are, with all the things that are going on in the world and in your life and on the job and in the carpool, all those things, if you're able to sort of clear your mind of that and really focus on your kids, then that puts a whole new dimension. So that's why I actually put that one first as the first pillar. And then the heart, of course, this is sort of the unconditional love that you have for your kids. And faith, really a strong pillar, because as Dr. Martin Luther King says, faith is taking that first step without even knowing where that staircase will lead. And we have to do that just about every day, as parents. Courage, obviously, like the line, we have to have courage moving through this whole thing, through this parenting world, and resources, being able to teach your kids that we can't have everything we want whenever we want it, but we have to work for it and really assess whether or not we really need it. And then connectedness, being connected not only with your kids in the way that they will hear you, even though you're not there, but being connected with yourself so that you can be the best parent that you can be. And then values. I mean, that sort of encapsulates everything. What do we want our kids to carry forward in their lives and in their roles as adults? So that's why I put those all together. And the 15 women that I included in the book, in addition to our story, really fell within these pillars as well.
Thank you, Joy. Yeah, it was satisfying to learn for me that the pillar you seemed to be most drawn to was faith, because as I was reading the book, I kept going back and forth about which pillar spoke to me the most. So, and I was wondering which one had spoken to you the most.
Yeah, it was faith. I mean, in part because my dad was a minister, so I grew up in the church. But I also, when my husband tragically died unexpectedly, my faith was tested. So getting back to where I needed to be was a challenge. But at the same time, I realized that my kids needed to have that strong foundation. So, walking the path of having my own reservations, but knowing that my kids needed it, that in itself was instructive to me.
So in the forward by your son, Wes Moore, who, for those who on the call who do not know, is the New York Times bestselling author of The Other Wes Moore and CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, he writes that he watched you, quote, cringe as the conversation around single parents continued to evolve and devolve in this country. So we know that there's a stigma associated with single parenting, especially single motherhood. Can you talk about the ways in which we might contribute positively to this badly needed narrative change?
Well, yeah, we've got to really change the narrative. We always hear about those things. I mean, the politicians love to tell me the problem with what's going on is that, the families are changing and that, too many single mothers and, that kind of stuff. We have to really change that narrative and show examples of what families with support, what can happen. And that's why I love the stories that I included, and one in particular, Hillary Pennington, who we hear from in a few minutes. It was such a wonderful example of having the support from grandparents, and then the mothers taking off and running with that support and creating her own space that helped other women, and then of course what her kids did after that was just a remarkable story. So that's why I wanted to include the stories to make it a real, so that people could see that we're different, but we have those things in common. We're afraid, but we also have the courage to step forward and to do the best. We all want the same thing for our kids, the best life possible for them.
That's right. Well, let's transition to Hillary because I know that she doesn't have a lot of time. Hillary Pennington, thank you for joining us today. Hillary is the Executive Vice President of Program at the Ford Foundation. Hillary is featured chapter. Hillary writes that she watched her mother sacrifice for her and her sister Tracy, a special needs child who needed their mother's presence. Hillary, thank you for being on this call today. I have a question about your mother, Vanessa. She made it her mission to every opportunity available and to put Tracy in an environment that allowed her to thrive. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yes, well, and can you hear me? Okay. Well, first of all, also, I just want to say such a thank you to Joy for the book she wrote and for the humanity that she brought into it. It really was a gift to be part of the storytellers that she referred to. My mother had a very hard thing happen. I'm the oldest of the three children. I was 3 when my father died, and my sister was 2 months old, and she was born with cognitive and physical disabilities. And she was born in 1959, so before the Individuals with Disabilities Act had passed. And my mother found herself, first of all, having to work, having a life she hadn't expected to have, but also having to really navigate and create opportunities for my sister because they didn't exist. The system had not provided them for children like her in those days. So she did a whole number of remarkable things. I mean, first, she did create a family that met each of our needs in different ways. And I was thinking, just Joy, as you were talking, every night she would come home from work and she would say, just give me 5 minutes to get my coat off, because each of us would have, things we wanted from her. And, but she had to work to find schools for my sister. There were some kinds of schools for people like my sister when she was young, but every time along the way, people told my mother that she should institutionalize my sister. And so she had to fight back against a system of judgments and ignorance and keep trusting that she knew best. The hardest time in my sister's life was when she was an adolescent. It was no longer possible for her to mainstream or to be in the handful of private elementary schools. And so she was bused to what was then called the Special School District in St. Louis, Missouri, which was basically a dumping ground, mostly for Black and brown children who had a whole range of needs. And it was an appalling system to see. And my mother you know, my sister was there for a handful of years, and then my mother kind of created an apprenticeship program for her to be an aide at Children's Hospital in St. Louis, and then helped her to get a certification as a nurse's aide, because she wanted her to have a profession and a skill, which she continues to this day. But it was super hard because she had to kind of fend off a lot of judgments with very, very little support.
Right. Well, as someone who serves in a leadership position in philanthropy, can you offer us some thoughts on what philanthropy can do to combat this unequal access to resources and education?
That's a big question. You know, I think that's the job of philanthropy. It's why I chose the work path, the career and work that I did. But you know, I think there are obvious things philanthropy can do in funding advocacy and funding services, direct service kinds of organizations, in working towards systems change across all the systems of education and care for children. But I think one of the most important things philanthropy can do is to make children like my sister visible. You know, I think very much children with disabilities are very often forgotten, very often not seen. There are few foundations that have explicit programs that address issues of disability. And so I think that just remembering to make visible, to include in their grant making strategies that incorporate people with disabilities is a very, very important thing that foundations can do. And to work, you know, like Mr. Rogers did, and what Max will talk about in a little bit in his book, to take away stigma and to help us all just see our common humanity.
Thank you. Joy, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to respond.
Well, I totally agree. I mean, giving that visibility to people with disabilities, to single moms, to all of that helps change the narrative. Because if people don't see others as how would I put this? As being I don't want to use the wrong word here, as being able and worthy of help and of support and of encouragement. And a lot of it is, you know, just recognizing that people are working hard every single day. And no matter what is going on in your life, you want the best for your kids, you want the best for yourself. And that people need to be recognized and celebrated for what they do, so that they can keep going, they can be inspired to keep going further. So I think philanthropy has a large role. One of the things that, and I don't know if she's on, another thing that philanthropy can do is something that a foundation in Florida is doing. And they are creating book clubs so that parents can actually have, well, they're doing it around the pillars, but, you know, so that they can get together and support themselves. And so that's one of the things. That's the Patterson Foundation in Sarasota, Florida. So I think that there are all kinds of things that the foundations can do. And foundations, philanthropy has always sort of been in the vanguard. You know, they are the risk takers. So I think we need to recognize and support philanthropy for that.
Thanks, Joy. And thank you, Hillary. I know you have to jump off in a minute. Thank you so much for joining us.
Having me and for doing this.
Well, now that we all have the recipe for good parenting, which I will be permanently pinning to the top of my Pinterest page, I want to switch our focus to children. As parents, they are the reason for our being. They fill us with life and love and teach us more about the world than we ever thought possible. And no one knew that better than Fred Rogers, the creator and star of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I'd like to introduce Maxwell King, the president and CEO of the Pittsburgh Foundation. Max's new book, The Good Neighbor, chronicles the life and work of Fred Rogers, who sought to foster compassion, equality, and kindness in the lives of the tens of millions of children who tuned into his show. Rogers was one of the most influential champions of early childhood development and was loved and respected for his fierce devotion to children's fears, concerns, and their questions about the world. Max, thanks for joining us today. There's a lot we can unpack here, but I want to start with the impetus for writing this book. What about Fred Rogers drew you to study his life and work? And can you talk more about Fred's outlook on early childhood development and what we can learn from him?
Well, I was surprised when I went to work at St. Vincent College at the Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning in Children's Media to learn that there wasn't a biography of Fred Rogers. And I went to that job when I retired from the Heinz Endowments. And, my function there as executive director was to raise money and get programs started. And I was frustrated by the fact that although Fred's legacy was exceptionally strong, there wasn't a biography. There wasn't a reference book that people could go to and read about his life. So that's what pulled me into the project. But as I got more and more into the research and got a better and better understanding of him, I gained just a really strong appreciation for what he represented in terms of human values, caring about children, but also very much caring about parents. He did a lot of programming for parents. He did a lot of writing for parents. And I think he had a lot of the same values, a lot of the same points of emphasis in parenting that Joy shows in her book, starting principally with honesty. For me in reading Joy's book, what is so powerful about it is the honesty of it. And the fact that she's able to concentrate on what are the elements of a really honest relationship with children. And what Rogers focused on, Rogers wanted you to spend time with your children because little children learn from grown-ups. They don't learn from books or media in the same way that they learn from grown-ups. But he was very focused on what kind of an engagement you had. Was it a truly honest, authentic engagement with children? Or was it the kind of engagement where you're sort of dealing with them and dealing with a lot of other things at the same time, giving them half-hearted attention, but also in what you say to them, not treating them as seriously as you would an adult. And what I love about Joy's book is the focus on honesty, the focus on authenticity, the focus on language, the focus on mentoring. She's able to describe so successfully the things that Rogers was focusing or trying to emphasize, which is this empowering relationship with children if you really treat them in a very serious, very real, authentic way.
Right. Yes. Joy's book is very honest. It's like reading diary entries, which is very useful when you're a parent going through, the daily rigors of just life. So Max, you are also a leader in philanthropy. What do you see? What can foundations do to help support good and engaged parenting in addition to emotionally healthy children, which is what many early childhood development programs focus on?
Well, I think for the last 20, 25 years, foundations have focused a lot on the development of the early childhood education system in the United States, building centers in cities and towns all across the United States, focusing on the importance of those early years in terms of the education of children. And in a way, it's been great that we've focused on that. And the United States has quickly built a significant system of early childhood education. But in a way, we missed the boat because in focusing so much on building those centers, putting children in the centers, providing good education outside the home, we have ignored parenting in exactly the kind of ways that Joy's trying to focus on parenting. And if you look at the data on how many children get into these centers, how many hours a day, how many years of their early lives they're in, it's nothing like the importance of parenting. So I think philanthropy needs to do a much better job now that we've built this system, now that we've accomplished a lot. I think I'd love to see philanthropy shift its attention to parenting and really trying to help develop programs that empower parents, give them the kind of information that's in Joy's book and in the biography of Fred Rogers, but really get to help them understand they have the secret, as Joy said. They have the secret sauce, which is this authentic, caring engagement with children. And so I think so many parents in the United States today don't understand the power they have if they can focus it in the right way. And philanthropy can help a lot with that. We've, at the Pittsburgh Foundation, in the last couple of years, we've started an intense focus here in Allegheny County on single-parent families headed by women. 70% of the single-parent families headed by women in Allegheny County are living in poverty. A stunning statistic, horrible statistic. But when you think about what it takes to be a single parent, raising children, working a couple of jobs, it's not a big surprise. So we're really trying to focus on parenting with that particular key group.
Right, that's great. Well, thank you, Max. We have another early childhood expert here, Kristen Burns from the Grable Foundation, which is also located in Pittsburgh in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And Kristen, I want to, and the Grable Foundation focuses on development, and their recent grant making includes support for mentorship programs, media literacy, and student achievement, and much more. Kristen, I wanted to invite you into this conversation so that you can offer your insights. And do you have a question for either Joy or Max, or just general thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for including me in this conversation today. Thanks to Vince and Media Impact Funders for hosting this. There's so much inspiration, both in the books and also in the comments that Joy and Max have already offered. It's great to be part of this conversation. I think about, as I was reading in particular the biography, I was thinking about Fred's role really at the frontier of what was for him the new technology of the day, television, and thinking about how he, in a way, co-opted it for good for children. It hadn't really been used that way until he started working in that space. And it makes me think a bit about today, technology is evolving in new ways, and how that too can be a force for good if used correctly. And I'm wondering, both for Max, but also for Joy, how can technology both help and hinder early childhood relationships and presence? I can think of a few examples, but I wonder if you could talk a bit about that for each of you.
If you like, I'll start out. It's clear that the technology of today in many ways can hinder the development of particularly very young children, 2, 3, 4 years old, and can interfere with the relationship between the caring adult, often the parent, and the child. So there are a lot of problems there. And I think that if Fred Rogers were alive today, he'd be horrified by some of the reporting on how technology interferes with the most productive development of children. But on the other hand, just as you point out, Kristen, one of the things that made him an extraordinarily effective entrepreneur who changed systems was he saw the potential of a cutting-edge technology, and he embraced it before almost anybody else saw its educational potential. He would do the same today. And actually, right before he died, he was doing a lot of his own research on the internet and looking at the internet. This is before a lot of the social media that we have today, but trying to figure out how could the technology be used in particular to empower parents.
Joy, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize for some of the background noise you made. There's a crowd behind me at
Quite
this
all right.
conference I am, so I apologize if you're hearing it.
Looks like there's kids, there's people.
I think one of the things, used correctly, technology can be wonderful for parents because you can't be everywhere for your kids all the time. So if you create this association with other parents, maybe if you have to miss a game or a concert. Someone else can record it for you, and then you can, listen with your child later on. So they're really helpful things that technology can contribute to this relationship. But on the other hand, studies have shown that one of the things that kids resent the most is their parents on the phone all the time, when you should be giving your presence and your attention to them. So it's that balance that I think the parents really need to achieve in order for technology to be a friend as opposed to an enemy to the presence that is required for parents.
Thank you. Yeah, I think also too about the potential for technology to help share the stories and examples, much like you each did in your book, right? Or Fred did in his shows to help change narratives and illustrate inclusiveness too. So perhaps there's potential there as well.
Go ahead, Max.
If you look at the sorts of social media, the apps that are being developed now, there's a huge amount of room for society to develop programming that helps bring parents and children together and helps bring parents and other parents together to share information in a way that can be helpful to them, and then brings parents into closer contact with, availability with some of the best thinking, the teachers who are teaching about what to do. And so we haven't even begun to explore the potential of both applications and social media and web applications that can bring people together as opposed to take them apart. And that's an obvious fertile area of inquiry for foundations to be looking into. What can they help support some of the things that might be developed?
Yeah, thank you.
Kristen, did you have another question? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, I see there's at least one in the queue, so I don't want to be an airtime hog. I'm happy to share.
Yes, we do have, looks like we have a couple questions in the Q&A, which I think we can get to. The first one is from the Patterson Foundation, and this question is for Joy. Joy, how did you go about selecting the stories from other parents you shared in your book?
Well, the intent was to create sort of a real kaleidoscope of situations and stories. So many of the women I actually knew and I had met through philanthropy, actually. In the 15 years that I was with the Casey Foundation, I met quite a few just remarkable women whose story I had known and sort of packed away. And, knowing that they were such an inspiration to me, that they would also be pivotal in the book. So there were others that I read about that I wanted to know. And so I reached out to them. And then there were others that I felt that I heard about from other people who I knew. So it was sort of a, very organic kind of putting together of these stories and the different situations that single parents find themselves in. And my hope was to create a really, a storyline that was inclusive as well as meaningful.
And I'd just like to jump in here because I want to pull out something I heard you say there, Joy. For all of us in philanthropy, we have access to so many important stories. And so for Media Impact Funders, one of the things we're doing today is we're talking about 2 books. Up until now, we've talked about journalism, we've talked about radio, television. We haven't really talked about books too much. And so there are so many important books. We're going to be paying more attention to books as media. Of course, they are the original media in some ways. But also, I think Joy and Max, both of you are showing that people who work in philanthropy have access to those stories. And with the dedication, they can tell those stories. It's an invitation to everyone who might have a book in them to get to work on that. And actually, I do know that one of the people on the call is Phil Buchanan, who's the president of the Center for Effective Philanthropy, where I'm on the board and Hillary Pennington's on the board. And he does have a book coming out. Maybe we'll hear from him in a few months. But also, I know that the question we had just now was from the Patterson Foundation, and they're actually working with you, Joy. And so I think we have Beth Duda joining us as a special guest. So, hey, Beth, you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing? Oops, we can't hear you. Is there a quick way of unmuting yourself? Let's see. Try it again, say something. Oops, you know what? Maybe we should have rehearsed this. We're not hearing you. I don't know if you have a way of turning your mic on your computer. You're unmuted, so you should be heard. But if we don't hear from you now in these next couple seconds, then maybe we'll go to, are you trying again? Yeah, we can't hear you. So if you go ahead and write us your question or comment, we'll pick it up from there. But it's nice to see you, and great to know that you're picking up Joy's book as source material for your work at Patterson Foundation. And we'll keep an eye on the Q&A or chat as well for further information. Nina, I'll send it back to you, Nina.
Okay, thanks, Vince. We actually have a couple questions from Phil Buchanan. The first one is, what should employers do to be more supportive of single parents and parents generally beyond paying decent wages and providing health care? And the addendum to his first question is, childcare costs are staggering. What is to be done? And I would also like the answer to that question.
Well, am I unmuted? Oh, okay. One of the things that I actually talk about in some of the stories, in my particular case, we had one of my bosses was a single dad. So we actually worked out a really great relationship in terms of when I needed to do something with the kids, I would just rearrange my schedule. And I think having that kind of flexibility, and of course that can't happen with everyone, but if you're even in a factory situation, having a relationship with your supervisor so that you can do a little swapping every now and then so that you can be with another, parent or person, doing shift work. Things can happen on an individual basis. I think part of the issue, though, is that we don't have the proper policy in place, so that if we don't have an understanding boss, if we don't have, a company that really values, the time that you have to spend with your kids, then that becomes a problem. But so we need to work on the public policy piece as well as the empathy piece on an individual basis.
Max, I know you have a response.
What I would add to that, not a response, but add to it, is this. Foundations must model the social change that they want to see. So I think every one of us needs to go through all of our policies, make sure that we have ample sick leave, we have generous parenting leave for when mothers or fathers are going to be having a birth or an adoption, that we have very liberal policies in terms of people who work for us getting time if their child is sick, if there's an emergency, that we institute a lot of flexibility in the workplace, because you have to create the kind of culture that you're trying to bring to the outside world. And then I think as you do that, it's very important that foundations are working really hard on those policy changes in society. Community foundations can advocate. We can lobby. We can go to the state capitol, and we are at the Pittsburgh Foundation, to lobby hard for those kinds of changes. But even family and independent foundations can do the research, can do the educational work. So I think it starts at home, where you demonstrate those policies yourself and then aggressively take it out into the community. If we don't create that kind of a fabric for parents and for society, there is no hope of closing the gap in terms of inequality in our society.
Kristen?
Yeah, I agree completely with what's been said. And to speak, Phil, specifically to the second question you asked about childcare costs being staggering, absolutely. I have 3 kids. I can speak personally to that. But at the same time, we also have to acknowledge that they don't cover the true cost of care. That burden is often carried not only on families, but also on the backs of the workers there who are paid not nearly what they should be. And so I would argue that philanthropy might be able to help around the edges, but philanthropy is not large enough to solve this problem alone. And so I would, again, echo what's been said about advocacy, especially from unexpected voices, right? We can make the case that quality childcare is great for kids, and it is, but we can also argue that it's great for workforce and parenting and other angles. So here in Pennsylvania, for instance, there's a group of C-level business leaders who specifically go to their legislators to talk not about taxes or corporate policies, but about childcare and about early learning. So the more I think that we as funders can support that kind of advocacy from the unexpected messengers, the more that legislators will perk up and take note.
You know, one of the things that that Max brought out in the book, which I loved, was the relationship that Mr. Rogers had with his grandparents. And I think and I know there was the same kind of relationship, very caring relationship that my parents had with my kids. And I wonder if we are sort of forgetting or overlooking what could be a very powerful marriage in terms of grandparents and their kids and our kids in terms of childcare. You know, if a grandparent is in fact able to play that role, they oftentimes do it for free. What if we actually help subsidize grandparents to help take care of their kids? Not only would they get and I'm just sort of thinking, right? But it can be such a powerful relationship because we want our kids, we want them to learn what we learned. And grandparents are sometimes young enough now to do that. And so why couldn't there be something where there is a subsidy as opposed to you're doing it for free and because you love the child. Yes, you love that child, but there should be something else, and that would help everyone all the way around. So that's my thought for today.
Thank you, Joy. Well, I wanted to, go ahead, Vince.
Just have to unmute myself. You know, I'm maybe not to put you completely on the spot, Nina, but I wonder if you also, in your own experience and with the multi-generational thing going on there, if you have a response to what Joy has said as you are living this as well.
Yes, I do. My daughters and I live with my parents currently, and I have to say that the relationship that my children have with my parents is the most beautiful I have ever seen. The connection that they have, you can't get anywhere else. But I will also say that while there's no one I trust more than my mom and dad to be with my kids, they're not me. And while they do carry out sort of my wishes, they are also grandparents and they love them so much that they're sort of unwilling to be the kind of voice in their ear that I need them to be. So so I agree with you, but going back to, Fred Rogers' philosophy, there just really is no substitute for me.
No, absolutely. Yeah, well, that's that whole thing about if someone shares your values, if someone
Right.
can be your mentoring that person, basically. If someone can do that, then I just think that there might be a kernel of something there, either parents or grandparents or an aunt or something like that, where it could maybe solve a couple issues.
Right.
I also wanted to jump in and invite Max and Joy to ask questions of each other too. If I know we talked about that on the planning call.
Would
Well,
Joy what I would ask about is how you got onto the powerful idea of using storytelling as opposed to just doing an explication in the book of what made a difference, what made you more successful as a parent than a lot of other parents. I think what brings a lot of the power and authenticity of your book is the storytelling. And I wonder if you had an instinct for that, or you had an agent or an editor or an advisor who pointed you in that direction, because I think it's made a big difference in the book.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your kind words, Max. Actually, I've been a documentary maker over the years, and I started in radio and went on to television, and then documentaries. I supported it, documentaries within all my years at the Casey Foundation. So I believe in storytelling. I believe in its power, and that I thought that I think that's the only way that people really respond to an issue. You need the data. You need all the other things, the experts and everything else to sort of back up the story. But once you grab someone with a story, then they're more apt to listen, to everything else that you have to say. So I just love storytelling.
Well, I'll just jump in and say it helps if you have a story to tell. And one of the things I've learned through many years of experience with Joy Moore is the stories she has. It's always this, there's always something else special about Joy. I remember riding around in the van at Sundance with you a couple of years ago where you talked about, interviewing
Bob Marley.
Bob Marley in Jamaica. And you have to have that experience to be able to tell that story. You have many more.
Yeah, well, Max, I do actually have a question for you. I was so struck, and it's funny because I don't think I really appreciated Mr. Rogers for a long time. I just thought he was this funny guy who took off his slippers and put on his sweater, and I didn't get it. I really didn't get it until I really started embracing, and a lot through your book, embracing what he was telling us about our humanity and about the empathy that we need to have, for one another, and the idea about Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. That's what's lacking. I think in our world now, we don't consider who we are and where we live and what we do with other people as sort of a community, a neighborhood. And so I really, really appreciated, reading, how he got to where his thinking was, and he was able to incorporate all of that. So, was there anything that you felt in your exploration of his life that really, that was the key? I mean, how did he get there?
Well, two things I would say. First of all, I appreciated the fact when I started the book that Fred Rogers is an important educator, an important innovator on television. I didn't realize what a philosopher he was, and that all through his life, he was a Presbyterian minister, so he was grounded in Christian theology, Christian values, but all through his life, he was reading about other religions and other philosophies, all the way back to Lao Tzu and Confucius, Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism. He was interested in all of it. And he was very motivated by the fact that he found a common set of powerful human values across most religions and philosophies. And it's what he tried to do with his program. He didn't make it overtly Christian or religious, as you know, but he tried to drive home these universal values like respect and caring and integrity and kindness and authenticity. And so I think that's a big part of his power as a teacher. And I do think of him as first and foremost as a teacher, a great teacher. So a big part of his power came from his embrace of philosophy, but his interest in and his sort of evolution as a thinker, as a philosopher. But the other thing that happened for him that was so valuable, back in the 1950s, he was making children's television, which was very successful on the WQED, the local PBS station here. And it was very successful, but it wasn't highly educational. And he was very, very frustrated. And he connected with a number of scholars at the University of Pittsburgh's Department of Child Development, managed or driven by a woman called Dr. Margaret McFarland. But there were other great thinkers there, Dr. Benjamin Spock, Dr. Barry Brazelton, Erik Erikson, the great philosopher and thinker about human development. They were all there at Pitt. So he studied with them, and that gave him the tools to really do high-end educational television. That was his aspiration, but he got the tools in academia. And what he gave back to the academics that is so interesting is he took their academic and theoretical thinking and took it to an audience of millions and millions of people across the country. So it was a wonderful relationship. It empowered Fred, and I think it empowered the early childhood education thinking that was emerging back then.
Wow. You know, it reminds me, as you know, throughout the book, I have lots of quotes, and I really really like to draw on the thinking of other people. And it reminds me of what you just said about Mr. Rogers, a quote by William Arthur Ward that says that a mediocre teacher tells, a good teacher explains, a superior teacher demonstrates, but a great teacher inspires. And that's what we got from Mr. Rogers.
Yeah. One of the things that Margaret McFarland mentioned that David McCullough, the historian and writer, has picked up frequently is that the right attitudes are not taught, they're caught.
Wow. Wow.
Well, I just want to read a comment from Beth from the Patterson Foundation, who couldn't get her sound to work, but she left us a comment, and I'll read it here. The connections between people grow stronger when we share our stories with each other. The book circle idea will allow participants time to meet each other and share not only the richness of Joy's book, but also share the experiences of their own lives. We have people from business, government, not-for-profits, and faith-based organizations coming together to meet their neighbors and create a sense of community. So thank you, Beth, for providing that insight. I couldn't agree more. Do we have a couple questions? Okay. I think we answered all the questions in the chat, but anyone who has a question, we have 6 minutes left. I urge you to leave a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Beth is writing to us in the chat here. She said our goal is at least 80 book circles of 8 people or more, and so far we have 35 book circles with more than a month to go. So thank you, Beth. If no one has a question, oh, okay. I'm sorry. Let's see.
I have a question for Vince.
Okay.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Good. Well, my question for Vince would be, if you look at the work of not just Media Impact Funders, but your members, the kinds of things your members are focused on and concentrating on, can you see a possibility of a little bit of a turn for them from funding a lot of the traditional media that we think of and trying to fund more applications, social media that directly address this question of parents and children and how they work together?
This is a huge question, and it's actually a topic that I touched on in a recent column at the Chronicle of Philanthropy. With all of the concern and outrage, really, with some of the problems associated with the big social platforms of Facebook and Twitter, and the problems that they bring, there are some voices in our field that are calling for investments by philanthropy in new technology that really serves the public interest, in an echo of the big role that philanthropy did play in transforming educational TV which was really just a fledgling activity in the 50s, to a full-scale, what it is today, and what Fred was able to broadcast through then. So there is a huge opportunity. It's a topic that we touched on in a recent webinar on the public square. We'll post the link to the recap of that, and anybody could watch that again. We're going to be revisiting that question next month in another webinar that we do in conjunction with PACE funders. That's Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement. And some of their key members are also focused on this. So this is an area of great opportunity, and really, I think it's a moment where just today we saw another breach by Facebook that people are. It's like, which day is going to actually spark our concern large enough to make an investment in an alternative path? I think it's a really good question. And I think we have something from Phil that Nina's going to speak to now.
Yes, so we have a couple questions. Phil says, those of us listening here at CEP are also thinking about how this all connects to the lack of community many of us experience in our lives. We raise our kids, driving them to activities and sports practices and going to work in between, but often they have very few natural relationships with non-family members of different generations, especially for those of us not involved in organized religion. It seems that parenting is made more difficult without the support structure and different role models of various adults. Sorry, someone's asking a question, and various adults in kids' lives. This has to do with how our communities are or aren't structured. I don't know if there was a question in there. That was more of a comment.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Max?
I mean, and there are ways to recreate that, and I think we have to be intentional about it. I think we have to, there was a time when we lived with our parents, and there's sort of 3 generations. With that comes challenges, but at the same time, it also exposes the kids to those values that we grew up with. And also, I think sometimes we're afraid to share our kids, with other people, and with the proper vetting. We need to really help them experience other situations from other people. So I totally agree that we need to sort of recreate communities in a way that has sort of been lost.
What I would add is, there's no question that a whole bunch of sociological changes, including the evolution of communications technology, have disrupted community. We all know that. But what we haven't explored nearly so much and need to explore is how to use these same forces, notably communications technology, for applications, for approaches, for programs that can help bridge that. And obviously, there's a lot of potential there.
Well, I think we're running out of time here. Vince, did you want to offer a final thought?
Yeah, well, I want to offer final thanks to you, Nina, for leading a really lovely conversation here, and all of our speakers, Max and Joy, of course, Kristen for pitching in from our peer group. Also a thanks, shout out to Shannon Rudisil, who's leading the group of early childhood funders who reintroduced me to Kristen in her work on this topic. So thanks, Shannon, for promoting and participating as well. And thank you all for participating in our last webinar for the year. We wanted to sneak one last webinar before the holidays. There's still time to click on the Amazon links to buy either one of these books as a great stuffer for your friends who are young parents or whoever. And we really enjoyed the ability to bring these different perspectives together. So thank you all, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joy.
Thank you.